interesting things. But I'm originally from Kansas, graduated University of Kansas in 2011 with a Bachelor's of Journalism, and so got the news leader job. So that's what I've been doing the last few years. So Ferguson, I was there about 3 days, more or less. And I was a little bit late to the game because I was I think I was in that second full week after the shooting. I went up on them. I don't know if you remember, if you watched a lot of the CNN coverage, there was you know that things were tense. Brought in Ron Johnson, and things calmed down for a day or so, and then they got tense again over that weekend, and on that Tuesday was probably had the worst visual images, if you will, that Tuesday night, because you got like Jake Tapper on CNN getting gassed on live TV during prime time, and so I went up the day after that, and it was a very it's not quite like anything else I've experienced as a reporter. You know, during the nighttime, you have thousands of people that kind of converge on this 4 or 5 block stretch of, it's basically a commercial, just a normal street like a Glenstone Avenue or a National Avenue kind of a situation. They converge in the evening, they march. The police require that they continuously move as they're marching, and they've kind of alternated between letting them be in the street versus not being in the street. But it was kind of a somewhat comic situation where they had you had these protesters required to march on the sidewalk in a loop around this up and down like 4 or 5 blocks, but the streets were closed, so there was no traffic in the streets. The police had shut down the streets, and yet you're still forcing these hundreds of people just to march around in a circle on the sidewalk. So it was a little bit of, it's kind of a bizarre scene when you're down there. I can't kind of overstate the differences between, it's hard to overstate the differences between how TV journalists operate in that kind of situation versus if you're someone who's writing, the kind of freedom you have. You know, if you're TV, you're kind of tethered to your camera, you're tethered to your base camp or your live truck or whatever it might be. So that, so a big thing you have to remember when you're watching the CNN images, the MSNBC images, you know, they're at kind of a fixed location and they're looking out at the scene, and whatever their camera sees is what you're going to get. Whereas someone like me, you know, I'm trying to write a story, so I'm running around, I'm up and down and everywhere, and I can leave the area if I want to and go talk to people and come back. So that gives me a lot more flexibility in what I'm able to do, because I'm not having to be visually compelling, if you will, in what I'm doing. Now, I guess as far as, you know, some of the First Amendment issues, you know, that first week, I think what kind of triggered a lot of anger for journalists was a couple pretty prominent print journalists were arrested they were in a McDonald's that was there. I went and ate at that McDonald's. I think it's like the most famous McDonald's in America now. But they were in the McDonald's, they were customers, and then police came in their black gear, riot gear, tactical gear, whatever you want to call it, which is intimidating if you're not used to that kind of thing. Basically said, you know, we have to shut down the restaurant now, you know, everyone has to get out, blah, blah, blah. And I guess these 2 gentlemen were not clearing out as fast as the police would have liked, so they cuffed them and put them in jail for a few hours. So, you know, journalists are like any other group, you kind of rally around your own. So I think that after that action, there was a lot more skepticism, and even maybe cynicism directed toward the police action from journalists. You know, there was a lot less goodwill between the 2 groups, especially when you had cops who weren't wearing name badges, who would not identify themselves. In one case, you had the Ryan Riley, who was one of the reporters who was arrested in that McDonald's. You know, the cop who I cuffed him, I guess, wouldn't provide his ID at the time, but then in the days after that, he would see that same cop out patrolling, and he'd go up to him and say, who are you? You arrested me, and I don't even know your name. And just kind of that, like, it goes back to this article about communication and how there was kind of whether it was a directive from them or if it's just certain members of law enforcement not wanting to communicate because they're fearful of having their image on TV or their name getting out or whatever it may be. That communication breaks down a little bit, and that increases skepticism, and that increases the chance that some kind of incident is going to happen. Now the first night I was there was kind of the last night, but there were clashes, and what they had done, which is kind of it's an odd concept, but they had so much media that they basically reserved this parking lot, and this was mostly for the TV people, because the TV people need a place to put all their crap. So they said, hey, you go into this parking lot, and as long as you're credentialed media and you're in this area, we're not going to mess with you. As long as you're in this area, you will be essentially treated. You will not be subject to the dispersal actions that's occurring out in the street. So with that in mind, midnight kind of comes around, and the legitimate leaders of the protests are saying, hey, we had a good day, please go home. And this is the problem where you have these mostly young people who really do not want to obey that idea. They don't want to leave, and then you have a couple maybe bottles thrown at police or objects and that kind of thing, and that's immediately everything escalated, and you have the line comes forward and they're saying, this is unlawful. I don't know if you've heard him, but it's like, this is an unlawful assembly, police dispersal. I just call him police megaphone guy. He comes on and tells everyone they have to go home. And the problem on this particular night was a lot of these agitators, they knew they had the media area, so they ran into that area with all of us. So now everyone's kind of interspersed, and that's what they wanted, because they thought, if they're next to us, they'll be shielded. So cops basically say, we're now going to, you all are intermixed, so we just have to push everyone out. That's what they did. And I thought, because they had used the tear gas the night before, I thought I would get gas. So I did bring my mask, which the paper bought for this, and we now have a news leader gas mask. We did not have it before, but it's kind of pretty. It's not too hard to put on. You just put it on your face. You can look at it later if you want. But that was really when they pushed through that line. That was really the only moment where I thought I would actually get something would happen to me, because you have the cop with the club like rushing toward me, and I kind of duck. Is he gonna hit me, or is he? What is he doing? But he kind of flew past me toward. I guess he was going after somebody else. But I think that's the difficulty, is when for law enforcement, when they weren't able to separate the two groups. I think that's when most of the attention happened, and that's when reporters feel like maybe they're becoming targets, and I think that was one of the biggest issues, is trying to separate the two groups and making sure everyone kind of understood their roles and everyone knew who was who, and that didn't always happen, and that's kind of how some of the issues arose. But I've talked for long enough.
Okay,
that's my overview.
Maybe you can relate to us any kind of incidents close to that, or how maybe what you heard there that maybe you can relate to or kind of work with.
With the Ferguson deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. My name is Scott Leven, like leaving on a jet plane, for those of you old enough to know that song. I retired from the Springfield Police Department after 26 years. I retired as a commander, lieutenant. I was mainly on evening shifts, so that's when everything goes down. So I dealt with the media every single night, every night. And the article that Steve pulled up about how effective leaders work with the media, no truer words could ever be spoken, period. From almost hour one, um, the mess up at Ferguson was exactly that, and it went downhill in a hurry. Anytime you got well, any shooting for that matter. I mean, if it's a big deal, if it's a homicide, if it's especially police officers involved in a shooting, it's a big deal. And frankly, it's newsworthy because everybody is going to show up to find out, okay, what happened, how'd this go down. To be very, and I mean very blunt, those of you know the lingo, that pretty much was a Charlie Foxtrot from the very beginning. Having been in the role that I've been in on the law enforcement side of things, your best friend really in that situation is the media. Now, Steve and I have not conversed about any of this before at all, but it truly is correct. You've got to get your word out. I mean, these guys are just doing their thing. I mean, they're coming in, they're going to report. They're going to get the news one way or the other. Either you give it to them or they're going to go find it. That's what they get paid to do, and they are very, very good at that. That's what happened. There was no media contact. The media started showing up. People started getting, I wouldn't say out of control, but they started expressing their emotions, and it went downhill in a hurry. They lost sight of trying to give the media the information that they needed so they could get that information out. That would have quelled everything. That may be a bold statement, but it would have helped a great deal. Case in point, during my career we had several officer-involved shootings. Not like the one where the guy got shot in the arse here recently. That was one that's a whole other story. But anyway, we've had several officers involved in shootings with bad guys. People want to know what happened. You tell them what happened, because guess what? It's not a big secret. They're going to find out eventually. But there's always been this big cloak and dagger, thing where cops don't want to talk to you. I never had that issue. I knew all the guys who worked the same shift I did. They would show up, hey Scott, how's it going? Just another day in paradise. And we'd have a little small talk. Hey, how the kids doing? Oh man, kids in Mighty Might football this year. That may be a rarity, but for me and quite a few of the other commanders, we knew the media on a first name basis, and they always know us because you're supposed to have your name tag on. We did have one guy for a long time, and he wore a name tag that said E. Fudd, as in Elmer Fudd, Bugs Bunny time, but that got corrected pretty quick. But anyway, the biggest thing is that just talk to him, and don't try and hide anything, because if you don't tell them something, the media's going to take the position, oh well, you must have screwed up, therefore you're hiding something, and it's going to go bad. I think as time goes on, you'll see some very interesting things come out about the whole Ferguson thing. But if somebody would have gotten up on the podium and said, okay folks, here's the deal, and if they would have given the media some information, it went horribly bad. And if you could have got the information out, I think it would have turned a few heads the other way. And by the time Jonathan got up there, what a lot of the people that the officers are dealing with, they weren't from Ferguson.
Yeah. Mostly, the majority of arrests were people outside. Exactly.
So now, we've got all these people getting carted off in handcuffs. They don't even live there. But yet now, everybody in America thinks Ferguson is some gar hole that nobody there wants to obey law and authority, that, oh, don't go there. That's not it at all. Not it at all. And Locally, like I said, we've had officer-involved shootings. We've had a couple of labor strikes we've had to deal with. It always goes back to the same principle: is the media is kind of like uh, my analogy, nobody else's, kind of like a stray dog. If you don't feed it, it's going to take your leg off, and it will. So you need to have some briefings, let everybody know what's going on, because the media is the conduit to the public. Who does law enforcement serve? The public. There's some things that we can't tell you just yet. We're knee deep in the middle of this. We can't tell you just yet, but um, we can tell you this part. Just give them something. Because, like I said, if you don't give them something, they'll take your leg off, or they'll go try and find someplace else that's handing that information out, and it may be Joe Witness who didn't see diddly, but all of a sudden he's going to get his 15 minutes of fame, and that happens a great deal. Big thing is especially when you go out in the real world, if you're going to do this, don't be the enemy. Man, you can it's like anything else, you can catch a whole lot more flies with sugar than you can vinegar. And if you go, hey, how's it going? How you guys holding up? How's everything going? I guarantee you, if you treat them like, because they're all human, they may not act like it sometimes on both sides of the fence. But if you just talk to them, chat with them, develop a little bit of rapport, you can get anything you want. You may not be able to publish it, and you may not be able to print it, but it's really kind of cool to be, I'm a huge Paul Harvey fan, and it's really cool to know the rest of the story. And it's going to be a while before we get the rest of the story, because right now, law enforcement, public, and media are all pissed off at everybody else, and nobody's saying anything. And that's kind of one of the biggest things that I saw, the fallout from that.
Let me start off with one question, and we'll let everybody ask. In Utopia, that's the way it works.
That's Springfield.
But now we have this other big monster called social media. And you can see, that's why I put that chart up. On that one day, almost 4 million tweets about Ferguson. How does that enter into the fact of how you respond to the media? Do you look at all those tweets? And how much are you monitoring those tweets, Jonathan, to see if there's something there that may be a nugget of a story? Isn't that now having an impact on how reporters do their job, and how the media, how law enforcement responds?
Well, I think, first of all, I'll say, I think social media has a huge impact, and I don't want to speak for you, but at the same time, just as far as the amount of evidence that can exist in some high-profile situations, because now people have video right after the shooting, and I don't think, as far as I know, there's not video of the whole entire actual Michael Brown shooting, but there is video right afterwards, and I think, when you have that kind of, a lot of times when you have, this was more true during the protests, is when you have the cameras are always on, people are uploading their short clips to YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, and just, a police officer always has to assume that they are being recorded anymore. That's just, if anyone who thinks that they aren't, the camera isn't there, is probably going to be wrong, and wrong in a big way at some point. Now, for us, for journalists, how that helps us is, there's such an exponentially greater amount of information that's available now, especially when it comes to video of these type of things. We can talk to Joe Witness and ask him, hey, what did you see? But if that person has, hey, let me show you my iPhone camera of what I just saw, that is that helps their credibility, and we're so much more likely to give credence to something if you actually see the video of it, as opposed to I'm just someone on the street telling you this is what I saw, but hey, here's a video and here's what actually happened according to the video. Just the credibility of those kind of stories is so much greater. As far as like the raw information, like here in Springfield, I'm not really going to see a whole lot of people tweeting about X, Y, and Z crime scene that's in a residential neighborhood or something like that. You're not going to see a whole lot of that. What has changed a lot is, say there is a homicide and we get the name of the homicide victim. Well, the very first thing we're going to do is this person have a Facebook profile? Do they have a Twitter account? Who are their friends on, their close friends and relatives according to Facebook? Have any of their social connections been implicated in the case in some way? Have they been arrested? That kind of thing, and it allows us to very quickly gather just incredible amounts of information about victims and potential suspects and things like that would have required a great deal more time before the internet to go around and gather. So in that way, it has revolutionized the process. So when we get a victim name, we can have an entire profile of that person's life within a couple hours in some cases.
Scott, does social media help you in your job or hinder you?
Yes and yes. I think it's something, you really hit the nail on the head. It's something you cannot ignore. It's there. Case in point, last week, a high school student was in Central High School, brought a gun to school, it fell out of the backpack, goes bang. Man, I mean, everybody is on the phone. Next thing you know, well, there's been a shooting at Central High School. No, there wasn't. But, that information is flying out faster than what a police car can respond to the scene. So, and another case in point, how did the Boston bombing get? Think about it. Surveillance,
Cameras.
and how was that video, how did it get out? Regular media sources, but what did Boston PD do?
Didn't they check Facebook pages or some kind of social media to see the uploads, and that's when they actually got a glimpse of
They got this
the
glimpse,
backpack?
and then they blew it out on Twitter. I mean, they had everything. You could almost follow it faster than what the officer could talk on the radio. There's somebody in there, I always like to call a little bug-eyed guy. He's sitting in there pounding on a computer keyboard, smoking this Twitter information out. Okay, the officers are here, they're checking, and basically went out, suspect in custody. Before the bad guy is even in the back seat of a patrol car, boom, it's out, suspect in custody. So, if you're not watching social media, and I don't think there's any way to control it, there's no way to harness that, but if you can get your version out and get some information out that's truly factual, as opposed to, well, there's been a shooting at Central High School, if you can get that information out, it is truly to your advantage. Along the same lines, you need to watch it, and it creates more work for law enforcement because usually there's always something flying out that, and just like, he mentioned, well, here's another lead we got to go chase down. And it may or may not be something that is going to pan out. But it's both a demon and an angel.
I think that's one of the real values now that a news organization can provide, and something can set you apart is if, because you really can't, fight the flow of information on social, come from anywhere and everywhere, but if you can establish yourself as someone who can verify the information and say, well, this information is true and this information is false, I think that is something that really helps because, on social, everyone's voice is more or less equal, basically, especially on Twitter, the only difference between, the tweet from Donald Trump is going to appear in your same timeline next to the tweet from your girlfriend or whatever. Like, the only difference is that the difference for us now, I think, is to, say, hey, we have a reputation for providing factual information, whereas everyone else in your feed, they might be full of it, or they might only have half truth. So I think that's a real value that journalists can provide now, is kind of to set themselves apart from this kind of monster.
Who's got a question? Anybody wanna,
What?
go ahead.
I got two parts. I'm freelance, so I can't actually say I work for it. So at what point, like say something downtown were to happen, at what point am I considered media, and what is the right way to call a cop out on, no, actually I can take that picture without making it even worse? Like, what is, from your experience, the best way to handle that?
Well, I don't think a police officer can really ever tell you not to take a photo in a public area. I think that's been affirmed through multiple court decisions.
It has been, but if it happened, what would you do?
I think I would try to politely explain that.
Okay.
And if
That'll get you far.
but I mean, in all truth though, for that officer, like, and not that you obviously in no way want to ever threaten an officer, but you do want to say, like, look, I have this right. If it's violated in this case, you have to know that I'm going to go write a huge story about how you told me to put away my camera illegally, and it's going to be bad for you in the long run. So if you can find a way to explain that without escalating the situation, good for you. Otherwise, I mean, make your best judgment.
Okay.
As far as, who's considered media, who's not considered media, like really, technically we as journalists we don't have any special rights that normal people don't have. It's just that we go further than other people normally. We exercise some of those rights more than other people do sometimes. Now it is true, if I am a crime reporter and I have a really good relationship with the police, maybe they'll come over and talk to me and tell me some things that they wouldn't tell the average citizen who just walked up to the scene. And if you're freelance and you're trying to break in, I think the best thing you can do is kind of develop those relationships and just have those friendly conversations. Maybe when the situation isn't so tense or things aren't going on. That way, when you see an officer at a scene, they already know you. You're able to say, hey, what's going on? And that level of trust is already there.
So Scott, you're downtown and the nightclub's let out and there's a big fight in the middle of the street and some journalist comes up and you see him with a camera. Are you gonna tell him to put it away?
That's an excellent question. It's one of those deals where you almost have to pick your battles. And when there's 500 really upset, pissed off, drunk people that not wanting to move, the officers really don't have time and don't really care to listen about, well, I've got First Amendment rights, I want to take a picture. Take your picture and move on. It's because that's exactly what was going on one of the most recent events is, and that was a little disappointing, coming from the PD, and we've got such a really good relationship with the media. We really do. And I'm not saying that because these two guys are here. It's serious. We really do. At least I always did. But we've got public information officers that, when that deal went on downtown, it was one of those Charlie Foxtrots. It was a mess. Well, they sit on it for like a week, 2 weeks. Well, then when the rest of the story came out, it's like, oh my God, man, those people were acting like idiots. I don't know why. I'm surprised they all didn't get pepper sprayed and hauled off the jail. But it's who gets to play their card first is what's going to get played in the media. And that's, if you're down there, you hit the nail on the head. Let yourself be known before it hits the fan, because they don't have time to talk to you and, oh, here's my card, I'm doing this blog, or they don't care. They've got a situation, they've got to care of this because it's in the public interest to move everybody along and get everything cleared out. But, you know, you got to make those contacts and you got to make those inroads very early on. And you'll be treated a lot more professional. If you are a professional, you'll be treated like a professional. And it's the same thing. Now, are there assholes that wear badges? Yes, there are. But it's always generally, that part comes out in the heat of battle. And we're trying to get things moving along. Case in point, you know, Ferguson. You know, there's two guys that shot their mouth off and said a lot of things that they shouldn't have said, and now they're unemployed. In any other circumstance, would they have gotten canned? I have no idea. But they shot their mouth off, and it was during the heat of the moment. Tensions are running high, not only on the protester side, but on the law enforcement side. And media as well. I mean, you know, I'm sure Jonathan felt like he was walking into a war zone. And there for a while, it probably was. But contrary to popular belief, not one single military surplus vehicle was on scene. None. Just so you know.
Who else? Who's got another question? Go ahead.
Ferguson. I'd kind of like to hear from both of you, but since you were there and you probably got to talk to some of the people that actually lived in Ferguson, would you say that there was already a level of distrust between the African American community and the police department?
Oh, obviously.
Good question.
So, I mean, every community is different, but especially in Ferguson, you had this situation where this was a majority white community 20 years ago. So they have had an incredible growth in their African American population very quickly. At the same time, elected officials and people who work in government in that city have remained mostly white. So you really have this lag of the demographics did not catch up. Demographics in city government did not catch up to demographics in the city. So that breeds a level of distrust when you're on the street and if you never see an officer looks like you or kind of speaks in your vernacular, that's like going to be something that's going to generate distance. And I think those obstacles can be overcome through relationships. I think you would probably agree. But if you haven't been doing the work on those relationships and something like, a Michael Brown happens, then, that's not the point at which you can grow those relationships. That's when those relationships are tested. And if that's not there, then, tension and conflict is going to occur.
That was probably the direction I wanted to go with you, is knowing that there's so much rebuilding that now that police department and really all law enforcement spread out because this whole thing has blown so far outside the confines of Ferguson, is what can the police departments now do to build a rapport with the public and gain that trust, and how long is that going to take feasibly?
It's going to take a long time. A few years ago, there was a little incident that happened in L.A. dealing with an individual by the name of Rodney King. That's 20 some odd plus years later, and law enforcement across the nation is still dealing with that. That was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. This is going to be but that's L.A. Nobody ever thinks about that in the Midwest. It's L.A. They're laying the fruits and nuts. Nobody ever thinks about that.
Hey, I'm from California.
Well, there you go.
I was there when
another infiltrator.
That's right.
But now we've got, and he's right. Ferguson, Florissant, it's North County in St. Louis. When my brother first went to work in St. Louis area for Southwestern Bell, he lived in Florissant. Beautiful area. Met his wife there. He since then went down south, but it has slowly. The shift has been significant, and we kind of struggle here in Springfield. We've got I think it's about a 3 3 to 4% African American population. It had a lot to do with recruiting. But you had such a fast shift in Ferguson that 70% of the city is African American. 53 police officers at the Ferguson Police Department, 3 of them are African American.
Wow.
So, and I think maybe less than 10 are female. So it unfortunately, law enforcement is, over the years, has always been a white male profession. Not necessarily by choice, it's just that we were the only ignorant ones dumb enough to do the job. But now and it's going to be a huge challenge, and I don't know, we were talking about this the other day, and I don't know that they will ever be able to overcome that, because, the African American community, they don't appear like they want to get involved in government. And somebody's going to do it. And the only way to affect change is you've got to get in there and do it. And I don't know. I think it's going to be eons. I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Scott, you brushed on another issue, and Jonathan kind of did too, this whole issue of militarizing the police. Tell me what you saw in Ferguson and how intimidating that was, and then Scott, just talk about what's appropriate for community police departments these days. Go ahead.
Well, what I saw in Ferguson is not what you would usually see on a typical day when you're driving around Springfield. It might be what you see sometimes if you are lucky enough to be present during a standoff. Is probably the only other time I've really seen people in that kind of gear. But you do have just this massive, by the point I got there was just a massive police presence in that area. It was kind of a saturation. And then you also had the National Guard kind of controlling this command center. So down about a mile away, then you had people in literal military and combat fatigues and Humvees driving around. But in the protest site, what you saw is generally early in the night, early in the evening, they tried as much as possible, at least when I was there, and these tactics changed over time. I think the police were learning as this was going on. And so the point at which I arrived was kind of fairly late on the scene, so I think they had already learned a lot by that point. But early you would have the plainclothes officers, just your usual just black or blue uniforms. Maybe a few of them might have the see-through riot shield or whatever. And they were the visible ones. They were the ones who would actually interact with citizens, protesters, telling them, please keep off the street and that kind of thing. Now what happens is, as the night goes on, police are, and rightfully so for most of the evenings, they were anticipating clashes. So about 9:30, you would just see this, this kind of personnel carrier, whatever it's called, kind of just drive down the street with, their black-clad SWAT dudes. That's probably the technical term.
That's what they like to be called. So yeah,
SWAT dudes. And just to see them kind of driving up and down, that kind of changes the tone a little bit. It says, we're anticipating conflict, and I'm not sure if you can ever send a different message than that, but because you have to be prepared. But you do change the tone a little bit when you're dressed like that. And I think part of it is you see a lot of the guys later in the night with the long guns and things like that, and you wonder, well, this is 400 or 500. Maybe they're very angry. Maybe they're kind of a little bit unruly, but they appear unarmed. Now, I'm sure that there were some in that crowd that probably had handguns and probably had, pistols concealed on their person. But it's on TV you don't see that, and so it appears to be a very peaceful crowd, and it is tough, I think, as an American, just to watch and see, you know, here's this line of SWAT-clad police officers facing off with just a group of, you know, likely vast majority unarmed citizens who are very angry and maybe a little bit unruly, but you know, aren't looking to kill anybody, aren't looking to necessarily do damage. So I think I understand the police's need to be prepared for all eventualities and obviously protect themselves. You know, at the same time, I think it's concerning when you see those images and being there, kind of seeing this, you know, massive amount of force and this massive amount of kind of weaponry, because there were a lot of, I would feel like, pretty significant weapons deployed. It's concerning. It wonders, you know, if we use it on a situation like this, then next time are we going to maybe use it on something not quite as serious? And you have to be worried about there's the slippery slope of that. And, you know, eventually, do we just have regular cops walking around in black SWAT gear all the time? Probably not. But I guess my thoughts are a little bit split on that. I can see the police's need to protect themselves and
Scott
the
said it's
watchers.
right. What do we need and what's overdone? And
Well, all the vehicles that it goes back a little bit to the relationship that you have with the media. All the vehicles that everybody saw, they've been commonplace in law enforcement for 20 years. It's called a Bearcat. It's a armored truck, if you will. The military has a version of it, but it's a lot bigger. And this is a commercially made civilian version of a military armored vehicle.
Springfield has one.
Yeah, they're about $275,000, I think. I can tell you that in my tenure at the police department, they've used it many, many times. It's considered a hostage rescue vehicle. If they do a search warrant, they'll always take that because you never know what's going to happen. It could go south pretty quick. One time at the American Inn, officers were doing a search warrant for a federal fugitive. One of the SPD officers got shot. He got shot in the leg and the femoral artery. This is not good. It's like 4 minutes and you are pushing up daisies. They were able to get it tied off. One of the guys grabbed him, literally drug him bouncing down the steps. And he'll tell you it's funny now, but it wasn't very funny at the time. Bounced him down the steps, and they couldn't go out in the parking lot because then the guy started shooting out a window at him in the parking lot. So here comes the Bearcat. They literally drive right over the top of him. There's a hatch in it. Open up the hatch, they pull him up and in, get him around the corner to an ambulance, and off they went.
Wow.
That is exactly what that's designed for. If we didn't have that, then, you know, I would have attended an officer's funeral. I think to some degree, it's designed. It is designed as a maybe an intimidation factor, but there's a timing involved. These people are really, really pissed off. You need to talk to them first. There's what's called in law enforcement an escalation of force. If I'm standing here in uniform, that's a use of force. If I give you direction, hey, don't go this way, go that way, that is a use of force. Then it goes up from there. It's hands-on, maybe pepper spray, maybe baton, right up to the point of lethal force. But this is one avenue that, and I know it sounds cheesy, but it truly is correct in the fact that you have equipment that is designed to protect the officer so they don't have to end up escalating up here. If you go to a fight, somebody slaps you, you may smack them with a ball bat. Somebody smacks you with a ball bat, you may try and stick them with a knife. Somebody shows up with a knife, you're going to shoot them. You do not ever in the law enforcement world meet equal force with equal force. a tie, nobody's a winner. It's really sad to say, but law enforcement is the biggest street gang in America. We get paid to win, because without order there is chaos. And we've got to one up everybody else. Everything started out fine, but unfortunately they didn't talk to people. They didn't meet with the media. They didn't get the information out, which they should have done early on. And it turned into a madhouse. And it kind of went downhill from there.
I think that's a really key observation you just made, which is why I think there was a lot of upset people, because I think a lot of people don't think that a certain level of force should be met with a greater amount of force. And I think that's what upset a lot of the protesters is, you know, if we're, you know, there wasn't maybe an attempt made first to, you know, for lack of a better word, fight with the protesters or
Sure.
try to physically push them away. Tear gas there was no physical contact between officer and protester before the tear gas was fired, and that kind of thing.
You know, and you made a very good point early on. We're talking about a 3 or 4 block area. They had traffic blocked off already. Let them have the street. Eventually, people are going to get tired and go home. All you got to do is wait them out. And I've got a lot of friends that were up there, a lot of guys that went up there to the incident. Some of them are still investigating the incident as well. But, I mean, I'm an outsider just like all of us are looking in. But, you know, having done what I've done, and, I mean, a gazillion presidential visits and a couple labor strikes and planning major events, it's no different than planning parking at a Springfield Cardinals ball game. You have a plan, and if you block off the street, let them have it. What harm is there going to be up until the point in time they start torching stores and looting and things like that? Now that's a little different story. But if you'd had a plan early on, and I'm not playing armchair quarterback here because I wasn't there, but if you had kind of done things a little bit differently, you know, I think you would have seen not as much. It may not have escalated as fast in the way it did.
Yeah. And I think part of this goes back to relationships too. Is a lot of those people they'd never seen the Bearcat until that
Sure.
point. So all of a sudden they're seeing all this equipment that they've never ever seen before, and they're saying, "Oh my God, they've been saving this, and now they're going to use it against us," and they don't realize maybe the legitimate purposes that it has otherwise. And so it is more intimidating when you see something like that for the first time, and you don't know, you know, what is.
And it really goes back to public relations, and I know it would probably shock a lot of you to know that probably every grade school kid in Springfield knows what the Bearcat is because they've crawled all over it. Mm-hmm. Just like a fire truck, just like a police car, an ambulance, you know, they've got the public safety days. I mean, rip it apart, you know, I dare you. They crawl all over these things. And, you know, these kids know what these things are for on the front end. It should not be a surprise. It's been very public, been very open. Some of you may not even know we had this thing, but it has paid off in spades, big time. And it has saved a lot of people's lives, law enforcement and John Q. Public.
Anybody else have a question? If not, go ahead.
Yeah, you said some of the officers were from out of town, and we've also heard like a lot of the protesters were from out of town. So where do you think the citizens of Ferguson were? Were they just kind of stuck between these two external forces, just clashing?
I think a lot of the arrested were from out of town. I think the majority of the protesters were from Ferguson, or at least St. Louis County.
Okay.
Now I think most of the officers were from St. Louis County. There was Ferguson PD, and then you had some of the other municipalities. St. Louis County Police, which is basically, I think they don't really have a sheriff's department. They just have the county police. And then obviously you had, I think there were probably highway patrol. It was probably mostly from that troop area, so that kind of region of the state. So you did have a lot, officers generally from the geographic area, and I think most of the protesters were from Ferguson. It was I guess, the violent protesters or the confrontational protesters.
So in your opinion, wasn't people from outside coming in to cause trouble?
Yes.
Go ahead. Anybody else? Go ahead.
So there was like a rush of wanting to know information, especially within the first week. Some would say that the Missouri Sunshine Law was broken by police, not giving out the name of the officer within the time they said they would. So how do you feel about that, and when is the appropriate time to give out information, like the name of the officer, the name of the victim, and things like that in the situation?
So I know, so in Springfield, how it usually works is there's kind of an established doctrine of how SPD does things and kind of what we expect to get when. And so usually, you know, homicide victims, if it's early in the day, we'll usually have the name by the end of the day. It's kind of later in the afternoon, we'll usually have the name the next morning. That's kind of typical, you know, that's kind of what we expect, and if things differ from that, if, you know, say we're going on a full day and a half and we haven't gotten the name, then that's when we start to say, well, hey, why aren't we getting the name yet? And maybe there's a reason, and maybe it's just, you know, whatever it may be, that would cause us to kind of a little bit more and say like, hey, what's up? As far as the case in Ferguson, it's a little bit complicated. I do know that, you know, there were a lot of calls for the release of the officer, and I know typically SPD here is pretty good about that. I think if I was a police department, I would probably argue, well, there's this officer is going to get a whole lot of threats, and we have to make sure we have enough security for this person before we release the name. I do think there's a legal requirement to release the name at some point. You know, to me, it felt like it took a little bit long in this case, but obviously there were a lot of extraordinary circumstances surrounding it. So I don't know. I don't think anyone, now that it's out there, you know, honestly, I don't think anyone would sue to say, you know, they didn't release it fast enough or whatever. But I think, you know, they obviously had to take steps beforehand, and I think they made the right decision. They did release the name. You know, like we both said, the police are here to protect and serve, and, you know, we as the public, we let them carry deadly weapons around, and that comes with a greater level of accountability. So I think, you know, releasing the name was the right call, and they probably took a little bit longer than maybe the journalist and me is comfortable with, but at the same time, there were definitely extraordinary circumstances.
You got anything to add to that, Scott?
I think timing for the whole thing was horrific. It was almost like everybody went up, and frankly, it probably started with the police. If you just would have gotten the information out earlier, I think things may have gone a different way. But when you hoard things and, you know, it's all mine, you know, once again, these guys have got a job and they're going to do it, and they are damn good at it. And, you know, they'll find things out. And, you know, the safety for the officer, especially when things started going awry, that's a big deal, because we've got one fatality already. We don't need to have a house burned down and a whole family dead. That's happened, and that's not good. Along those same lines, you know, when I talk about timing, here's the officer's name. Oh yeah, and here's this video of the victim robbing the store. Come on, could you not be a worse choice in the land? That's just my opinion only. Don't quote me on that. But I think you know, timing was everything. There were reasons, I'm sure. I've got to believe there were, You know, you still got about 2 days to comply, 2 or 3 days, I think, with sunshine law, but it was right around that edge. But it goes right straight back to give the media periodic updates, even if you don't have much to tell them. You've got to have periodic updates because you've got to feed, no offense, you've got to feed the monster. And if you don't, it will eat you alive. And I mean that sincerely. We really don't have much issue. I mean, every now and then we have a few rubs every now and then, but I mean, it's friendly. You know, the media's not burning down the PD or anything, but you know, a wise man told me many, many years ago that you never argue with anybody that buys their ink by the barrel full, because they will always have the last word.
I don't know, did any of you read the newsletter today? Did you see Amos's column about, you know, how we're fighting for some of the city? There's some kind of investigation going on in the Environmental Services Department right now. And, you know, Amos, they're not giving him any of the records that he wants. So, of course, now he writes this giant column about how they're not giving him any of the records.
Guess what you're going to have tomorrow?
Yeah. So I guess, you know, that's kind of, and that's a little bit of our trump card is, you know, if you don't give us even a little bit of information, we'll probably stave off the reporter a little bit. But if you don't give us anything, then you're going to get the article that says, well, hey.
And that's very true. It very much is true that if they're there to do a job, you just need to accept that from the law enforcement side and move on. Because I'm telling you, I would much rather have what the facts as I know them. Here's the facts, because if it's coming from a government official, most times, you should be able to take that and run with it. I don't want a reporter or some guy with a camera going rogue to go find, hey, what'd you see? And whoo, 15 minutes of fame, I'm in. And they come up with some cock and bull off the wall story that you may or may not be able to substantiate, and then social media kicks in. Next thing you know, whoosh, it goes from there.
And I will say, one point on the point of the officer's name, I don't think any established media actually leaked that name before it was released. And I'm sure there were multiple organizations, a lot of organizations who knew the name and probably could have confirmed it either through anonymous sources or leaks or whatever. And I think that was, you know, part of the judgment where, you know, we'll hold back as long as there is that level of trust to say, we're going to hold back, but you guys need to be doing this for a
And I think that probably did happen.
Yeah.
I think, because, you know, there was not a photograph of the officer. Well, all you got to do is hit Google. And, you know, I guarantee you, if you go home tonight and type in my name, it's Leven, you'll get 2 or 3 of the most horrendous media pictures you've probably ever seen in your life. Stories that I have done. But once it's in there forever. And Facebook and LinkedIn, different things like that. And that not only goes for law enforcement, it goes for John Q. Public and media as well. Careful what you put out there, because it is out there for God and everybody to see. And we had an offshoot. Had a guy recently that had posted a few pictures of minor drinking a few brewskis over in the library at MSU. Happens to be a student here, was over there studying with his good buddy. Well, this pops up on I think Instagram. Somebody recognizes the location. It's the library on whatever, somewhere hall over there. And so we call the guy in to talk to him, and I show him the picture, and he says, well, that's private property. What are you doing with that? I said, dude, you posted it on Instagram. It's nobody's property. It's out
probably
there.
Instagram's property.
Exactly. It's out there for everybody.
Everybody.
And so be careful. If you're looking for a job, things like that, take all the beer guzzling pictures off your Facebook. Employers look for that stuff. Just FYI. But that's how they got a picture of the officer, was a news story that, because he got a commendation for something, and
For being a good officer.
isn't that ironic?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's how the picture kind of popped up. Good questions, guys.
Yeah, I just have one more, and it's really just for Jonathan. I asked Scott to talk for
I'm gonna,
he's talking.
listen, I took the bacon frying comment earlier, just
Oh,
lay it on me.
we didn't get to hear that one.
I'm interested, Jonathan, and this is kind of a personal question for you, but what impact going up there and covering this has this had on you, maybe personally and professionally?
Good question.
I can't believe you go to something like this and not come away with something that you've learned from this by yourself.
So in a weird way, and these are completely different situations, but the last situation I would say that I was in, that was kind of had this kind of impact, was I was in Moore, Oklahoma, the day after the tornado there. That was about a year and a half ago now or so. And that was something that was incredible. And I don't know, at least for me, every 2 or 3 years in your career, you kind of get to cover a story that is, it's a little bit not like anything you've seen before. And you know, this was like that, because you're going into a situation, these kind of daily confrontations between police and protesters. There really hasn't happened in our country since I've been alive, at least. Well, I'm not, 89.
Just a
I was
pup. What's that mean? I ain't 89 either.
But I think, part of it is, a story like that, it kind of expands your mind a little bit, and it teaches you to be a little bit more open-minded and not to have as many assumptions about things, and maybe as you had coming up. I went up there and I have no idea whether Darren Wilson is guilty of whatever he may or may not be charged of, and I have, even after being up there, I have no idea if, Michael Brown was shot, his shooting was justified or not. Like, even spending 3 days there was not enough for me to get clarity on that. But what the value of an experience like that is hearing about the different perspectives that people have there. And I talked to, the second day I was there, I talked to a teacher, black teacher who was, he has like a 10-year-old son, and I wrote a story about this, but he lives in Ferguson. I was asking, what do you tell your 10-year-old son about this? And he gave this answer of, I tell my 10-year-old son that we live in a world governed by racism. And that is not a view that you'll hear very often in Springfield, Missouri. It doesn't mean his perspective's incorrect. That may very well be from his entire life experience. That may very well be the true experience of what he's seen as he's grown up and he's lived. But that's the kind of viewpoint that you're not going to always hear just sitting here in the Ozarks, or going about your normal day. So the chance to go to a story like that, where you hear perspectives and you hear viewpoints that you haven't heard before, and that really kind of shake you out of your normal routine, is, I think, really great. And also just, personally, it's always really good to be reminded that my problems are not really that big. The issues in my life are relatively minor. I have and not to get too sociological, but I have a lot of privilege, if you want to use that term, and there's all these things that I don't encounter on a daily basis that other people do, and to get the chance to be in their world for a little bit is really valuable, and something I'm glad I had the chance to do.
All right, well, I think this is, hope everybody appreciates this. This is very valuable, I think. Thank these two guys for coming.